Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast.
This essay is a multi-voiced, embodied meditation on autistic experience, told without translation, apology, or narrative compromise. At its core, this is not a story about overcoming. It is a quiet, persistent refusal to be flattened, simplified, or made palatable for neurotypical comfort. Each section reclaims language and reframes dominant narratives. From behavior to care, inclusion to voice, it centers those too often spoken over, asking not for awareness, but for agency. Structured with the same texture and timing it honors, this work offers not closure, but presence, insisting that autistic lives are not metaphors or lessons, but entire, exact, and already whole. Support structures often operate on fear of liability rather than a commitment to freedom. This is evident in the protocols taped to the back of her door. They don't declare their intentions outright. Instead, they read, staff must remain within 15 feet of client at all times, and client must be supervised during all outings. The document is formatted in sterile Arial, double-spaced, written for auditors rather than for the person whose life it governs. She has not touched a doorknob alone in 5 years. She is not considered unsafe. She is considered unknown. Autonomy in these systems functions like an electrical switch, off until proven on. The burden of proof is hers. She must demonstrate agency within structures that actively prevent it. She must seek permission to disagree. When she says no, the system hears maybe. When she doesn't speak, it speaks on her behalf. This is not support, it is design. The language of safety carries an unspoken clause. Only some are granted it without negotiation. Others must earn it through agreeableness, compliance, and predictability. Risk in these systems is treated as a privilege rather than a right. Yet risk is the condition that makes personhood real. The right to fail is part of the right to live. In her first group home, staff measured independence by absence, specifically the absence of requests. If she didn't ask for anything, she was seen as progressing. If she melted down, they logged it with concern about her goals. Her own goals were never sought. Compliance received praise. Curiosity was redirected. Decision-making attempts were funneled into scripted choices. Would you like A or B? When she said neither, they marked her non-compliant. Agency in such contexts is not presumed. It must be demonstrated, visibly, rationally, on schedule. It must align with what staff expect. It must never contradict training. But what if autonomy begins not with demonstration, but with belief? She once sat at a bus stop, unaccompanied, feeling the wind strike her chest like the possibility of a future. It wasn't the wind that made her feel free. It was the absence of supervision. Her body didn't yet know how to unclench. Her eyes scanned for correction. Still, in that brief moment, she existed outside of documentation. The issue is not support, but its definition. Support without consent is simply control with softer language. If autonomy is offered only after safety is proven, it becomes a prize for passivity, not a right. True support asks, what do you want to risk? Then helps make the risk possible. It scaffolds courage, not obedience. It understands that to be human is to occasionally be inconvenient. Autonomy is not the end of care, it is its beginning. And not everyone is given the same distance to reach for it. Speech is not his native language. His language lives in pattern, delay, loop. When he types, meaning arrives sharp and whole. But when he speaks aloud, everything shatters. Phrases fragment, tone betrays him, rhythm collapses. So he stays quiet, or he scripts, or he types slowly. He's been told to use his words. He has. They were ignored. Communication for him isn't absent, it's precise. It's structured like a score, measured pacing, careful repetition, layered signals. But the world wants volume. It wants fluency. It wants response on demand. His pauses are misread as defiance. His scripting is called behavior. His silence is mistaken for nothing. He remembers being 12, sitting in a corner at school with his device, typing a sentence over and over. I don't feel safe. A teacher walked by, glanced at the screen and said, useful sentences. He already had. Most people don't read what he says. They look for tone, facial expression, eye contact, as if meaning only counts when it's audible and fast. But once, someone did hear him. It was his sister. He was trying to explain why he couldn't join dinner. The lights, the voices, the smells. He typed, "It's too much in my skin." She didn't ask him to rephrase. She didn't speak over it. She just nodded, turned off the overhead light and said, I'll bring you food later, in the quiet. He still thinks about that sentence, how it landed, how it stayed. That was the first time his body exhaled in someone else's presence. His communication is not missing, it's simply not shaped for spectacle. He repeats phrases to build rhythm. He scripts to anchor himself in unfamiliar places. He types slowly because each word carries a weight. He speaks in loops because that's how the thought unfolds. But every support plan treats communication like a test. Say this, indicate that, point, nod, smile. Meaning becomes something to prove. He is done proving. Fluency isn't the measure of thought. Speed isn't the measure of clarity. When someone listens without rushing, without interpretation, without expectation, something opens. He has words, he has syntax, he has stories that don't fit linear time. He is not delayed, he is paced. Communication is not performance, it is presence. And when presence is allowed on his terms, language arrives not as noise, but as truth. Not for correction, for connection. For once, not a voice, but a signal received. Speech is not the only voice. He knows this in his bones. When he types, his thoughts arrive whole, intact, structured, not filtered through the tangle of spoken syntax, not slowed by articulation. Yet his silence is mistaken for absence. The world around him waits for a sound, a gesture, a cue to translate into meaning. Without it, he is narrated, spoken about, spoken over, spoken for. Communication, in its dominant form, is a gate. Those who speak fluently are seen as competent. Those who do not must prove they belong. Each word spoken aloud comes at a cost. Delay is read as defiance. Literalism is misunderstood as confusion. Precision is treated as detachment. But his language lives elsewhere, in rhythm, movement, repeat. Meaning does not vanish because it takes time. At school, he once stood and walked out mid-lesson. It was the only way to hold himself together. They called it non-compliance. He must request permission, the notes read. No one asked what he needed to escape. His communication isn't missing, it's unrecognized. Fluency is rewarded more than understanding. Classrooms prioritize speed over clarity. Typed expression is viewed as secondary. Rehearsed speech is questioned. Flat tone is marked as lack of engagement. But when he communicates in his way, the depth is undeniable. His insight arrives fully formed, unsoftened by translation. He once told a support worker, via keyboard, that listening should be measured by what changes after. She nodded and returned to her checklist. In meetings, he is asked to explain. When he does, they ask again, as if understanding must look a certain way. They hear difference and interpret deficit. He knows speaking is not the only language. His body speaks in pacing, stillness, repetition. He has learned to code switch for survival, to shape his answers into forms the system finds acceptable. But this adaptation costs him precision, costs him peace. Real communication is not measured by volume or speed, but by resonance, by what is made possible afterward. He is not lacking words, he is rich in language shaped in sensation, rhythm, delay, language that loops and arrives in unexpected shapes. What he says is not less because it's typed. What he knows is not incomplete because it's expressed without voice. He once repeated the same phrase for 3 days. I'm still here. No one noticed it as anything but scripting. But it was not a loop. It was a claim. It was a sentence that never needed translation. Routine is not restriction. It is navigation. For her, predictability is not about control. It is about orientation. When the world follows a shape she can anticipate, her body breathes more easily. She moves with less resistance. But when schedules shift without warning, when light changes texture mid-step, when a voice suddenly carries a different tone, time becomes unstable. The room tilts. The day slips. She doesn't fear change. She fears unpreparedness. Her processing is layered, recursive. Information does not arrive in order. It arrives all at once, tangled, loud. What looks like hesitation is sorting. When she doesn't respond right away, it's not avoidance. It's assembly. But systems don't wait. They speak over her pause. They call her slow when she is listening more fully than they know. Time in these systems is measured by compliance, class periods, behavior logs, appointment slots. These clocks do not match the time her body keeps. Her memory doesn't file itself in neat rows. Past and present overlap. A meltdown from childhood can echo in her chest 10 years later if the air shifts the same way. She was once told she had missed a milestone, as if time was something to catch up to. She remembers the word they used, behind. She wasn't behind, she was elsewhere. Planning is not simple, not because she doesn't understand time, but because holding multiple timelines requires energy she's already spent regulating the now. Her executive function isn't broken, it's busy. She builds routines the way others build scaffolding, not to stay in place but to reach further. Her consistency is often misnamed rigidity, but what's called inflexible is often protective. Predictability is not a crutch, it is a form of access. Without it, the simplest task can collapse into overload. When the system denies her time, it denies her personhood. Pacing isn't preference, it's necessity. She processes in spirals, not steps. Her thinking doesn't arrive on demand. It loops, returns, deepens, and when allowed to, it produces clarity that linear time rarely affords. She remembers a day when everything moved at her speed, a quiet room, no interruptions, no urgency. She read the same page for an hour, tracing the words with her finger. When she looked up, the world had softened. She is not disorganized, she is continually interrupted. Time for her is not a line, it is a rhythm, and the systems built around her rarely bother to listen for it. She has been studied more than she's been seen. Each evaluation rewords her into metrics: delayed, inconsistent, atypical. None of those are her terms. Each time she is assessed, a new version of her is produced. Legibility, it seems, requires surrender. She knows who she is. The problem is that no one believes her unless she explains it in a language they've already chosen. Ontological safety, being allowed to exist without distortion, has never been part of her care plan. Every aspect of her identity is interpreted before it is understood. When she scripts conversations to feel safe, it's called rigidity. When she avoids eye contact to stay grounded, it's marked as a social deficit. Her ways of knowing, being, regulating are constantly reframed as absence. To be autistic for her is to live under continuous reinterpretation. She is asked for her goals, but only within preset options. When she resists the framework, the refusal is pathologized, uncooperative, unwilling, does not engage. The reports don't capture that the choices offered to her are already shaped by what others think she should want. Diagnosis offered her clarity once, briefly. Then it became a boundary, a box she had to decorate in ways that pleased others. If she is too articulate, her support is questioned. If she struggles to speak, her understanding is doubted. She must calibrate her identity every day to stay legible enough to be included, but not so clear that she becomes threatening. She notices who is believed and who is corrected. She notices how girls are described as anxious instead of autistic, how Black autistic youth are seen as aggressive instead of overwhelmed, how non-speaking people are assumed incompetent before they even enter the room. Recognition in these systems is not neutral, it is political. She is tired of performing recognizability. Her identity doesn't arrive in tidy narrative. It loops, flickers, rewinds. She holds memory in scent and music. Her selfhood is textured, not linear. She is not confused. She is untranslatable by design. She doesn't want to be read more accurately. She wants to be read less. Being seen on her own terms would require systems to relinquish the need for certainty, to stop asking for proof, to stop demanding she decorate her difference in familiar language. She isn't here to pass, she's here to exist. She has lived in multiple translations: Black, non-speaking, autistic. Each identity comes with its own script, none of them written by her. When she enters a room, assumptions arrive before she does. If she moves too fast, she's aggressive. If she doesn't move at all, she's unreachable. If she types, it's questioned. If she doesn't, it's ignored. She exists in a body that people have already decided the meaning of. Her first evaluation didn't include her. It was a conversation between professionals about deficits, delays, risks. No one asked what she needed, only what she lacked. Her mother pushed for support. The system offered surveillance, speech goals, behavior plans. The reports used phrases like non-compliant and appears resistant. They meant she said no. They called her articulate when she typed, then treated her words like performance. They told her it was impressive, then continued deciding for her. Recognition is always conditional. She knows that if she were white and verbal, her silence would be read as choice, her resistance as insight, her self-direction as autonomy. Instead, she is labelled difficult, hard to place, complex case. Even in activist spaces, she is expected to simplify, to inspire, to speak of liberation without naming the weight of race, gender, speech. When she does speak, it's often in fragments, not because she's broken, but because she's precise. She places her words like stones in water, carefully, one at a time. Still, people interrupt, fill in the blanks, soften her truths. She is fluent in being misread. They praise inclusion, but ask her to leave parts of herself at the door. She doesn't want to be empowered. She wants to be listened to. Her sensory world is sharp, fabric textures like static, fluorescent lights that slice, voices that press too close. But her difference is not only sensory, it's historical. She carries both inherited silence and imposed muteness. Her ancestors taught her how to move without being seen. The system calls it elopement, she calls it survival. Autistic does not cancel out black. Non-speaking does not cancel out woman. Her body is not theoretical, it is specific, and it has never been neutral in any room it enters. She no longer wants to be translated, she wants to be unedited. Identity for her is not a single thread. It's a tangle of codes, risks, re-entries. She will not unravel it to make others comfortable. She is not here to make her story easier to hold. She is here to speak it whole, and if they can't hold it, they were never listening. And if they can't recognize her as she is, then maybe recognition isn't the goal. Maybe presence is. Maybe that's enough. He has always been told to contribute, to show initiative, to prove he belongs by what he produces. Work for him has never been about money alone. It has been a constant test of acceptability. As long as he appears useful, he is tolerated. The moment he falters, support evaporates. His first job interview was an exercise in translation, every gesture rehearsed, every answer sculpted to sound neurotypical. He passed. For 3 months he masked so thoroughly he barely ate. When the burnout came, it was total. He collapsed under the weight of his own invisibility. They called it poor self-management. No one asked what it had cost to stay composed. Productivity is the currency of worth in systems not built for him. But his labor doesn't follow a standard arc. He works in bursts, in focus so deep the world vanishes. He builds frameworks others rely on. He solves problems before they're visible. But because he doesn't perform success in the expected ways, his brilliance often goes unnoticed. Disclosing his diagnosis is framed as both empowerment and risk. Ask for accommodations, but carefully. Self-advocate, but gently. Be yourself, but not too much. Each step is a negotiation of visibility and survival. When he works independently, his results are sharp, nuanced, sustainable. But freelance life offers no protection. Traditional employment demands fluency in small talk and speed. He is not antisocial. He is exhausted by performance. Presence is mistaken for participation. Participation is mistaken for productivity. He attends meetings, speaks when needed, listens deeply. Still, he is called disengaged. He proposes alternatives, written communication, asynchronous formats. They say it lacks collaboration. His gaps in employment history are held against him. Periods of recovery, of recalibration, of surviving in silence. These are read as instability. He knows they were transformation. He is tired of masking competence to gain proximity to power. He does not want charity, he wants recalibration, a structure that meets thought where it begins, not just where it concludes, a workplace that measures outcomes by insight, not chatter, one that recognizes non-linear progress as growth. He has succeeded before, on his own terms, in the quiet, with integrity. He doesn't want inclusion into systems that distort him. He wants systems that evolve, systems that stop treating productivity as proof of worth, that see work as one form of contribution among many, that understand his value is not conditional, that he does not need to be fixed to be vital. She has spent years being touched without consent, guided by elbows, redirected by hands, restrained by arms stronger than hers, justified by policies written in soft tones. Each time it was called support, each time her body was overwritten by someone else's idea of care. She has learned that to be safe in the eyes of others often means surrendering control of her own body. Consent, in most systems she's moved through, is not continuous. It's procedural, a checkbox, a signature, an assumption. When she flinches, it's labelled a behaviour. When she refuses, it's called non-compliance. When she withdraws, it's seen as regression. Her boundaries are treated as obstacles rather than expressions of personhood. She connects through rhythm, through objects, through shared silence. Her intimacy is deliberate, earned, offered without spectacle. Still, her way of relating is read as flat or distant. Her gestures are misunderstood. Her privacy is pathologized. The world wants her closeness, but on its terms. She once asked a caregiver not to hug her. They paused, smiled, and said, "You'll want one later." That moment stayed in her body longer than the embrace. What was erased was not just preference, but agency. She wasn't asked. She was managed. She knows what intimacy feels like when it's real. It makes room, it doesn't assume, it notices without pressuring, it doesn't rush in to fix, it waits, listens, adjusts, it doesn't label difference as difficulty. Her friendships are built slowly, layered through repetition and pattern. She remembers who held space without asking her to perform gratitude, who learned her quiet as fluency, who didn't need to be reassured that she cared. Too often, emotional labor is extracted from her in the name of support. She must explain her needs in comforting tones. She must smile while advocating. She must script thank yous for care that cost her comfort. It is expected that she participate in closeness, even when it drains her. But she is done managing other people's feelings about her boundaries. True care does not assume access. It does not demand explanation. It does not translate resistance into pathology. It recognizes that safety is not created through supervision, but through respect. She wants connection, but not at the price of erasure. She wants tenderness, not containment. She wants her needs heard the first time, without the softening that makes them easier to ignore. What she asks for is not unusual. It is simply rarely granted, to be touched only when she consents, to be supported without being held down, to be close without being claimed. He has seen versions of himself appear everywhere except where it matters. On screens, he is either a savant or a warning. In reports, a risk or a deficit. In fundraising campaigns, a child in need of saving. These are not representations, they are reductions. His story has been told for him, shaped to reassure others. Popular narratives of autism follow familiar arcs: tragedy, triumph, assimilation. They flatten lives into metaphors. If he doesn't inspire, he doesn't belong. If he doesn't suffer visibly, his support is questioned. He becomes a device in someone else's story about empathy. He once wrote a story with no plot, just fragments, sensations, a body moving through time without resolution. He submitted it. The response was polite. "It's hard to follow." They meant it didn't confirm their structure. They meant it didn't make them feel hopeful. Visibility, he's learned, is not the same as recognition. Autistic people are represented without being recognized. When representation only includes certain kinds of speech, certain bodies, certain stories, it becomes its own kind of exclusion. He has watched Black autistic youth criminalized, non-speaking peers dismissed, women diagnosed decades too late. What passes as inclusion is often just repetition with a different actor. He does not want to be admired for surviving distortion. He wants the distortion to stop. He is not here to be a teaching tool. When he speaks plainly about inaccessibility, people call him aggressive. When he softens, they listen but do not change. When he's silent, they narrate over him. He cannot win, so he no longer plays. His art now resists readability. He layers symbols. He breaks form. He builds pieces that defy easy sentiment. He does not want to be understood quickly. He wants to be encountered. His identity is not a performance. His story is not a redemption arc. He dreams of representation that doesn't collapse him into a plot. He wants complexity, contradiction, fragmentation. He wants the kind of story that doesn't end in acceptance, but in autonomy. He once stood on a panel, surrounded by well-meaning professionals. The audience clapped after every sentence. He said something difficult. They clapped anyway. He is no longer interested in applause. He doesn't need to be seen. He needs to be left intact. He needs space to narrate himself in his own rhythm without the pressure to resolve into something reassuring. His story isn't here to uplift. It's here to remain his. Her thoughts live in her body, not after it, not above it, within it. She thinks through repetition, through rhythm, through motion. When she rocks, she is not soothing herself. She is organizing. When she flaps, she is not distressed. She is aligning. Her stims are not symptoms. They are structure. Still, the world insists her body is a problem to fix. In classrooms, her movement is seen as distraction. In clinics, it's listed under motor abnormalities. At home, it's sometimes met with worry, but to her, motion is meaning. Stillness is what disconnects her.
When she's told to stop moving, it's not just her body that is interrupted, it's her mind. She once told a therapist that she thinks best when she paces. They smiled and asked her to sit still so they could work. The irony was missed. In most spaces, cognition is assumed to be verbal, abstract, disembodied, but for her, cognition is somatic. It begins with breath, with pressure, with rhythm. Her body is not a vessel for thought, it is the instrument of it. When the environment is too loud, her thinking scatters. When lights flicker, words evaporate. When fabric clings wrong, she loses her thread entirely. None of this is overreaction. It is a system responding honestly to input. But the honesty is pathologized. They call it sensitivity, as if perception were a flaw. Her knowledge doesn't always fit into speech. Sometimes it loops, circles, repeats. She might echo a word for days. It's not a tick. It's a way of keeping time with her own comprehension. She once lay on the floor for 20 minutes, hand pressed to wood, feeling the grain against her skin. Someone asked what she was doing. She said, learning. They didn't write it down. She is not asking to be explained. She is asking not to be interrupted. Her stimming is not a failure of regulation. It is regulation. Her movements are not a sign of chaos. They are coherence. She moves not to escape thought, but to access it. When she's given space to move as she needs, her clarity sharpens. When no one tries to redirect her hands, her language flows more easily. When her body is accepted, her mind is less fragmented. She is not trapped in her body. She is rooted there. To know her is to watch her move, not to interpret it, not to stop it, just to allow it. Her body is not a deviation from thought. It is the origin of it. It is how she understands. They invited him to be the face of a campaign. Authentic autistic perspective, they said. He typed carefully. He wore the shirt. He sat for the photo. But when the materials came out, his words had been rewritten, his pauses removed, his complexity flattened into a single message. I've overcome. He hadn't overcome. He had adapted. Representation, they say, matters. But often what they mean is comfort. Visibility that doesn't disrupt. A story that reassures. They wanted his image, not his truth. When he questioned the edits, they said the language needed to be more accessible. What they meant was more palatable, less precise, less him. He has watched the same pattern unfold across media, panels, books. Autistic voices chosen not for depth, but for narrative fit. Uplifting, non-threatening, hopeful. Those who script are ignored. Those who stim too visibly are left out. Those who name systems are labelled difficult. He once sat on a panel meant to showcase autistic diversity. 4 of 5 panelists were white, verbal, and employed. The only non-speaking participant was spoken for. When he brought it up afterward, the organizer said, "We're working on being more inclusive." He didn't return the next year. Visibility without authority is extraction. He remembers the first time he saw an autistic character on screen, the stilted speech, the miraculous memory, the storyline that turned autism into plot device. It was meant to be empowering. Instead, it felt like being watched through glass. Everything familiar made strange, every difference exaggerated or erased. He doesn't want more characters, he wants narrative control. When he writes his own work, it loops, it diverges, it resists conclusion. Editors often ask for clarity, for closure, for something audiences can connect to. What they mean is something they already understand. But his truth doesn't resolve. It contradicts, it fractures, it reassembles in spirals. They say they want representation, but when he names the cost of masking, the exhaustion of adaptation, the trauma of being edited, they say it's too heavy. When he brings up race, class, or the violence of diagnosis, the room goes quiet. He is not difficult. He is telling the truth. He doesn't want inclusion into stories that flatten him. He wants space to narrate without being translated, to speak in full, to be heard even when he doesn't resolve into metaphor. Representation isn't progress if it demands performance. Visibility isn't freedom if it comes at the cost of wholeness. He is not a plot point. He is not a bridge to someone else's empathy. He is the narrator, and he is not asking. He is writing. He has always been told he's too much, too intense, too quiet, too reactive, too flat. Emotion for him is a crowded room, each feeling pressing in, none fully named. He feels everything, but he's rarely believed. His expressions don't always match what others expect. When he's overwhelmed, his face may go still. When he's joyful, it might not show in his voice. When he's afraid, it may come out as laughter.
This mismatch is misread as absence, as apathy, as disorder. But his emotions are never absent. They are just not performed on command. Meltdowns are framed as lack of control, but for him, they are what happens after hours or days of holding too much. A scream that finally escapes the locked room. Shutdowns are framed as withdrawal, but they are what protect him when every nerve has been scraped raw. His emotional regulation is not broken, it's saturated. He once tried to explain how feelings arrive late, that he can smile through pain and only cry 2 hours later alone, that sadness doesn't always start with a tear. It begins with pressure behind his eyes and noise in his bones. A teacher said, "You should learn to recognize it earlier." He already had. They just hadn't learned how to listen. Empathy for him is not theoretical. He absorbs atmosphere. He senses when someone is hurting before they speak. But his response might be silence, might be a shift in breathing, might be a question that doesn't sound like concern. His caring isn't always visible, but it's real. He's learned to script emotional responses that feel safe for others. "I'm fine. That's interesting. I understand." These don't reflect how he feels. They reflect what's expected. Every genuine expression becomes a risk.
When he cries in public, people panic. When he speaks bluntly, they flinch. When he doesn't respond, they fill in meaning. Emotional accessibility becomes a demand. He must be legible to be acceptable. But he no longer wants to perform emotion for comfort. His feelings aren't defective. They are precise, layered, delayed, and real. He feels in spirals, not straight lines. Emotions return and recombine. They're not problems to solve. They're part of his way of knowing. He remembers once standing in a crowded train, tears on his face, unmoving. No one asked if he was okay. Later, a stranger messaged him to say they'd seen him, but didn't know what to do.
He wishes they'd just stood beside him. Sometimes emotion doesn't need to be managed. It needs to be allowed, to be felt without translation, to be held without judgment. His silence is not distance, it is depth. His overwhelm is not a breakdown. It's the honest end of too much restraint. The policies say they are here to protect. The forms list safety protocols, intervention procedures, risk assessments. Each document uses neutral language, but he has felt the weight of what they mean. These systems do not protect him. They protect themselves. He remembers the first time he was restrained. It was quiet at first. 2 staff, low voices, soft commands. He didn't want to go inside. He wanted to stay outside 5 more minutes. That was all. When he didn't move, they touched his arms. When he pulled away, they followed procedure. Later, they said he escalated. No one asked why he froze. The paperwork was filed that same day. The restraint was documented. The incident reviewed, the behavior logged, the risk justified. What he felt, fear, violation, betrayal, was never mentioned. Systems call this care. He's been asked for feedback. They give him forms with boxes to check. Do you feel safe? Do you feel heard? There is no box for sometimes, no space for it depends who's working that day. When he answers honestly, nothing changes. Accountability is promised but rarely delivered. When harm happens, it is absorbed by the structure that caused it. The complaint becomes an administrative task. The harm becomes a misunderstanding. The staff are trained again. He is told to be patient. He has been patient his whole life. Ethics in these places are about optics. Consent is a form, not a practice. Autonomy is conditional. Rights are granted by those who can take them away. If he refuses care, he is deemed unstable. If he questions a decision, he is told he lacks insight. He watches who gets believed, who gets protected, who gets to walk out without being followed. He doesn't want reform, he wants repair. He knows what ethical care could look like. It would begin with belief, it would honour refusal, it would not punish difference, it would understand that safety is not created by controlling people, it's created by respecting them. He once asked a staff member why he couldn't choose who supported him. She paused, then said, "That's above my role." He knew that meant no. He doesn't want more training modules, he wants systems that are interruptible, that do not rely on compliance to function, that do not treat survival as gratitude. Justice doesn't begin when the report is written. It begins when harm is no longer treated as protocol. when his voice is not just documented, but followed. He is not asking for perfection, he is asking for power, for a system that protects him not from himself, but from being erased by policy written without him in the room. She is no longer waiting to be included. Inclusion, as it's offered, is often a performance, a seat at the table where the menu is already fixed, a space that demands gratitude before participation.
She wants something different, not presence within the structure, but power to reshape it. She remembers being invited to a planning meeting about her own support. Professionals filled the room, therapists, coordinators, case managers. She was the only one not paid to be there. When she spoke, they nodded, then continued as if she hadn't. They called it person-centered. It felt like being edited in real time. Representation without authority is decoration. She has spent years learning their language, understanding their systems, making herself clear, but clarity is not always enough. The system does not lack information. It lacks willingness to change. She no longer softens her voice. When she challenges a decision, she's told to be respectful. When she writes her own goals, they are revised for measurability. When she names harm, she's reminded how far she's come. She doesn't want reminders, she wants repair. Inclusion that requires erasure is not inclusion, it is assimilation. She finds more truth in unsanctioned spaces, online collectives, peer networks, unmoderated groups where nothing needs to be explained twice, where silence is not read as failure, where refusal is understood as an act of care. These spaces are messy, non-linear, and real. She doesn't want a seat at the table. She wants to build a different table, one where access is not granted, it's embedded, one where difference is not accommodated, it is foundational. Her vision is not abstract, it's built from what she's lived. She imagines a world where scripting is respected as communication, where stimming is recognized as thinking, where slowness is not treated as delay but as depth. She's not asking to be recognized, she's naming herself. She's asserting that expertise lives in the body, in the sensory, in the emotional, in the lived, not just in theory. She remembers once being told she was too angry to advocate effectively. She was calm when she heard it. But inside, something sharpened. She wasn't angry, she was clear, and they mistook clarity for threat. Her clarity remains. She doesn't want inclusion that costs her identity. She wants liberation. A system that doesn't just make room, but changes shape. One that listens without requiring translation. One that values truth over comfort. She is not waiting for change, she is already becoming it.